Take a look at what's on the board behind me. The world needs to hear your story. About 3 days ago, I got an email from one of our avid subscribers to the Bunker Bash. And in that email, which was it was probably a 2 or 3 page email
from one of our
Hang on a second.
subscriber.
She wrote and told me about her life story. She told me about what was going on in her sphere, and she told me about what had happened to her in her life. And the fact was, it was moving. It was a story of pain. It was a story of resilience. It was a story of difficulty. And it was a story of life. And it was exactly the kind of story that the world needs to hear today. There's no question that we're in a world right now and in pain. There's no question that we have a world right now that's questioning what's going on. And I said this several episodes ago, but right now, the world is getting their news from regular people, not from the news. My guest today said something to me on the phone yesterday that I thought was shocking, and I'm going to ask him about in just a second. He said, news stories aren't even stories at all. What I can tell you is that the world right now is looking to people just like you. It's your story that's going to give people hope. It's your story that's going to motivate people to action, and it's your story that's going to change the world. In just a moment, I'm going to bring on my friend and my guest, Hollywood story coach, Michael Hauge. Michael has been the brain behind some of the biggest movies on the planet. He's been the guy that a lot of the big movie agencies have brought in to totally transform their entire shows. And he's the guy that I brought into my business to help me tell better stories. So in a minute, I'm going to introduce Michael Hauge. But before I do that, I want to welcome some of you who are saying hello in chat. Y'all are amazing, by the way. So thank you for joining us. And by the way, if you're not already logged into chat, it's over to the right or just below on your social media platform of choice. Please do jump in, tell us who you are, where you're from, and what you do. I want to welcome some of our friends. Hello, Leora. Good afternoon, Ed, and let's rock this boat. Jim Butts from Carlsbad, California. Hello, Bob. Good afternoon on the East Coast. What's up, Jim, again? Hey, Roy, welcome back. Good to see you again. Mojo Mindset, pulling the curtain back. I see. Paul Bigham, signing in from warm and sunny Dallas. Hello, Catherine. Looking forward to jumping in the bunker and listening to Michael Hauge. He is truly amazing. Barry Gamir, what's up, man, from Palm Springs? Gotta be beautiful out there. What's up, Jim from Ohio? And let's see, Ed, Wynn, Barry, welcome back. Good morning, all, especially to Lisa Toole, who apparently runs this thing like Oz, pulling levers, pushing buttons, and keeping it all on track. So we are going to rock and roll here in just a second. I got to get my audio so that it doesn't echo here. But as you're joining us, let me just say this. Let me say welcome to you. I just want to acknowledge you and honor you for being here. We plan on doing these shows every single day at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 o'clock Eastern. And I will tell you that yesterday we did our show and I didn't send out an email to my list. And a lot of you said you really wish that I had sent an email. So do me a favor, just to get this show in front of other people. When you like and comment and share, it means a lot on YouTube, Facebook, or Twitter, whichever one you're watching on right now. So if you wouldn't mind just clicking that like button and clicking the share button and saying hello to the folks that are on there, that would be awesomely, awesomely helpful. Now, I'm not going to get into this today because I'm planning on doing this tomorrow, but this morning I woke up at about 5:30. My mind was moving at about 100 miles a minute. And what I did was write the entire outline for tomorrow's show and change completely our game plan tomorrow. On tomorrow's show, I'm going to be breaking down and showing you what's happening with our economy and what's about to happen with our economy. And I can show you with near 100% certainty, based on what the Federal Reserve is doing and based on what the U.S. Senate is doing, what's about to happen. And you're not going to want to miss this. That's going to be on tomorrow's show, which is Wednesday. Now, without any further ado, I'd like to welcome my friend, Michael Hauge. And as I bring Michael on, hopefully you can see him now. As I bring Michael on, let me just say uh, the what I consider probably one of the highest compliments I can give Michael Hauge, which is he's a completely abnormal, amazing mind, but he thinks he's basically just a normal guy. And so without any further ado, I'd like to welcome my friend, Michael Hauge. Welcome, my friend. How are you?
I'm great. Happy to be here.
So let me take you into a question that yesterday you said to me that news stories weren't news stories. What did you mean by that?
Well, to me, a story means a certain thing, and that is it's about always a character who wants something desperately, who faces seemingly insurmountable obstacles in order to achieve it, but then they overcome those obstacles and they get it. They win. Now, occasionally in stories, the character doesn't get it. The character might lose it or give up the goal for some higher purpose. But even if they don't win, we take away a lesson from it. We learn more about how we should live, or we're cautioned against taking the wrong path. But it's always about character, desire, and conflict. To me, news stories are not stories. Oftentimes they don't even have heroes. They're just situations. But mostly to me, news stories are crisis and conjecture. They're about problems, and then this is what might happen. And most of the time what might happen is awful. Okay? So here's the analogy I would make. Imagine, because everything I think about is from movies, although when you talk about character, desire, and conflict, I realize it's going all the way back to the golden books that I was raised on, The Little Engine That Could, or Mr. Bear Squashmallow Flat. They always won in the end. The engine went up the hill. But imagine you're going to a Cineplex, and you go into one of the theaters because you want to see one of your favorite horror films. So let's say it's Jaws. That's one of my favorites. Could be anyone. And the movie goes on, and the creature, the demon comes. In this case, the shark comes, and we're all caught up in it. And right about the time when Quint gets swallowed by the shark, the lights go up, and they say, "Thank you. I hope you enjoyed the movie." In the next theater, we're showing the first 3/4 of Psycho, and then the first 3/4 of The Ring, and then we'll show the first 3/4 of Alien. And that's how the newspaper is. They get us into a story where there is a crisis, where there is a desire. So let's take what's going on now. They'll lay out, this is what we all want, to get past this virus. This is what stands in our way. And then they shut it down. They don't carry it on to say, this is what's happened, because usually by the time something actually concrete good happens, it gets buried in one of the back pages. And here's why that happens. The newspapers, and I say newspaper, I don't need to pick on them, newscasts, everything you see on TV, but they understand one of the core principles of storytelling, and that is stories have as their primary goal to elicit emotion. We listen to stories, we watch stories, we tell stories because we want to create an emotional experience, or we want to have one. And the primary path to creating emotion is conflict. Okay, so that's why we want to go to horror movies, in a way, because we want to have that emotional experience. But what they've done is they've made us conflict junkies. So we're getting the emotional charge of the obstacles, and that gets people to tune in, and that sells papers, and that makes people gravitate to that. But they don't get it to the end, where we see that those obstacles can be overcome, where we see that there's a possibility. When you go see a movie that you love, you leave with some sense of finding courage and hope and success. And as Will Smith once said, they show us how to live better. They don't just say, all this shit's going on, watch out. That's not, to me, a story.
So you mentioned horror movie. I don't know why I thought of this Friday the 13th movie that I watched when I was, in high school. And by the way, I watch no horror movies at all anymore. But when I was in high school, I watched this movie, And there was this character, you know, Freddy Krueger, who, and I'm not sure if that's your beeping on your end or my end. Oh, you know what? Hang on a second. That's my Facebook.
You can't blame the guest.
What's that?
I said, don't blame the guest.
I know. Yeah, no, it's just that, you know, convenient. So you have this Freddy Krueger character, or Jason, I guess, was Friday the 13th, whatever. So at the end, you have closure, you know? Now, you find out in the second movie, he'd never really died. But at the very end, at least you have closure. And the thing about the news stories now is that they're, like you said, designed to get you to the point at which you're like frustrated, discouraged, kind of pissed off, but there's no end closure. So now we have a great viewership of storytellers. I mean, I'm looking through, Jim House is here, Leora is here, Roy, Jean is here, Denise, whose story I was discussing actually in the beginning of today's show. We have been blessed, Michael, to have people on this show who are storytellers and in a lot of ways are thought leaders. So in a time like this, where we're facing literally probably the greatest international crisis that we've had since World War II, and maybe since before World War II, how do people tell great stories that really do engage the reader into a place that they can take action and see a great result in their life or their business or their families or their health?
Yeah, I agree, because I think, and one of the reasons I was really eager to talk about this and start with this thing is, I think all the toxicity and fear that is created by those pseudo stories or first half of stories or whatever needs to be counteracted. And that's why your followers can do a great job of this. I've been talking for years about how you can grow your business and acquire more clients and inspire people and so on with stories. But now I think your number one goal is you've got to put some positive hope out there, some sense that there will be closure, some sense of things can get there by telling stories about people who have gone after things, faced insurmountable obstacles, and won. I'm not saying you tell stories necessarily about the virus, although that would be good. People who've survived, people who've found a way to connect through this isolation or whatever. But any story that has a hero we can empathize with and has a pursuit that we're involved in gives us the same experience emotionally of courage that the hero has to show. And that's what we need now, is feeling courageous. So the way you do that, I mean, that's a huge question, but I'll just start with this. I was thinking about a movie that was one of my favorite movies that I was ever involved in as a consultant on the script, and that was Karate Kid, the newer version, because I was doing consulting for Will Smith and Overbrook, his company, and they were producing this movie. And it was already close to my heart, because when I first started giving lectures around the world about screenwriting, I'd always pick a movie to use as an example. And for a long time, the original Karate Kid was the one I used. And then now I got to participate in it, and we got to all get together. There was a time when, you know, the Smiths had this giant house. They were staying in the winter for Christmas up in Park City. So me, the screenwriter, the producer, and the director all got flown up there, and we spent 3 days working on that.
By the way, this is the guy who thinks he's normal. Okay, so tell us about the Park City.
But I'm also guilty of name dropping. You know, Will Smith. I mean, you know, my whole career seems like has been because of his quote and me getting to cite him as someone I've worked with. But the movie itself, you may be thinking, okay, Karate Kid, what's that got to do with you telling your own story? But here's the thing, and I could have picked any movie. I could have picked any Hollywood movie, certainly, to use as an example. But think about Karate Kid. In Karate Kid, doesn't matter which version you're familiar with, you know, whether it's about Daniel and Mr. Miyagi or Dre and Mr. Han, but starts out with this kid, single parent, you know, sort of struggling to get by, but has friends in school and so on. And then all at once, he's getting transplanted to this new place, chime in later when San Fernando Valley in the first. Now he's in this foreign territory trying to figure out what to do. And then he's hit by this huge obstacle. He starts getting beat up by bullies. Okay? So then he finds a guide. He finds a mentor, in this case, a teacher or a sensei with Mr. Miyagi or Mr. Han, who helps him, trains him, shows him both physically and emotionally how he can overcome that goal. And he goes through all of these obstacles and he gets beat up and he has to practice and it's tough, but finally in the tournament, he wins. And as a result, he's not only victorious, he's also developed. He's also transformed. He's more courageous. It's more of a coming of age thing. He's more of an adult, and he's reconnected or connected more closely with his family and with Mr. Han or Mr. Miyagi and so on. Okay, that's how stories work. Those are the key elements you want in any story you tell. But think about Karate Kid in terms of what's going on now. Okay, we're in this new situation. There's this virus, and all at once we find out this is a pandemic, okay, or whatever. This is way bigger than we thought it would be. And so now we're struggling to figure out, how are we going to get through this? How are we going to overcome those obstacles? And so what we need to instill in others and in ourselves is the kind of courage that Daniel or Dre had to find in order to overcome that. So even within this virus, stories about people who are having success at overcoming it in some way or finding ways to connect in unusual ways. Ed, you talked, I think, a couple days ago about how in Italy people were standing on rooftops or getting on their balconies to sing so they could feel united. Even that story, it doesn't say this is how you cure the virus, but it's a story about somebody who wanted to feel connected, or a group of people, and they found a way to do that in spite of obstacles. I'm getting a little soapboxy here, aren't I? I am sort of passionate about this myself, but that's what I believe. You give people the experience of courage when we empathize with and connect with the hero of a story, and they find courage.
This is, okay, so I want to just pause here, and let's together, as a community, let's think about this, because what Michael just said, first of all, I believe what you just said is the secret to communicating right now. And I will just tell you, as you're watching this, in full transparency, I said this last week, and I'm still saying it this week, which is, we don't know yet exactly what's going to happen. And I will tell you that as a person who considers himself a thought leader, that's a difficult thing to say. And it's difficult to say because first of all, it's a truth, but it's difficult to say because everyone wants to know what's going to happen. Now, I have a pretty good guess, I think, as to what's going to happen. And I've hinted at that and even talked about it over the last week and a half. But here are some things that I do know. And as Michael, as you were writing this down, I was writing some things down that I thought, you know what, this is what we do know. And when it comes to communicating hope, courage, vision, and a future. So for example, there's a verse that I sent to a friend of mine, which, whether or not you're a religious person, a lot of people, you probably recognize this. It was out of the book of Jeremiah in the old sacred text. And it says, it's essentially God saying to his people, I have a plan for you. I have a future for you, and I have a hope for you. And it was spoken to them at a particularly difficult time, arguably even more difficult than what we're going through. So the things that I wrote down, for example, this latest pandemic, has taught us that we have more community than we probably thought we did. It's taught us that we have more interconnectivity than we thought we did. It's taught us a lot about the human spirit and our ability to revel and rise to the occasion. It frankly has taught us a lot about our immune system. We have been gifted a beautiful immune system. So back to the text again, there's a verse that says that you've been beautifully and wonderfully made. It's taught us a lot about courage, and it's taught us a lot about how to communicate success in the midst of this. And then the other thing that I would add to this is it's taught us what to do next. And what to do next is to take the next most logical step in your business to create the kind of success that you want. That's the reason why many of you who are watching, by the way, are registered to come to the next Ultimate Speaker event that Michael, by the way, comes and teaches as one of the teachers at that event. And you'll know if you're registered for that, we're doing a training today to talk about what to do next. What are the steps? And so thank you for what you just said, Michael, because it is a reminder that it just doesn't stop in the theses and being stuck in it. It continues into the hope that's coming next, right?
And it's not like I'm not saying, well, you necessarily burn all newspapers and TV news.
Yeah.
There are open-ended stories. Okay, I understand that. Stories, they're just not good stories. But even in an open-ended story, you can do it sort of like a soap opera or a TV series, and that is, okay, here's a crisis. Yes, we may be leaving you hanging, but we have given you an understanding that the character has tools with which to overcome this. They have an inherent level of courage that they can, and there are other examples from stories and elsewhere that show that this can be done. So every story does it. You can't just limit yourself to people who have succeeded, but you can tell the story in such a way that, look, here's this hero you identify with. And yeah, they're up against something, but we're going to take the approach that this is going to work out okay, and you just have to wait and find out how. I was talking to a very close friend who's a doctor yesterday, and he said he's had now at least 19 patients, a whole gamut and spectrum of patients who have the coronavirus, and they've all gotten through it. They all survived. And just even a few stories about that, take one person and say they got it. It was very difficult. They were frightened, but they did this, this, and this, and they had this setback and this setback, but now they're past it. Not only are they past it, they're healthy and they're immune. I don't know if they've established that, but I just went through something I haven't done for days. I went through the LA Times looking for headlines, and none of them, there wasn't a single story about here, today's survivor is, and that's just rudimentary.
It's interesting too, because you would think, I mean, fundamentally the news is about readership and followership. And you would think, because you can't do, let's go back to movies. You can't do a movie that's all bad news that leaves people terrified when they leave. That doesn't sell. So how is it possible that news, this huge, I guess it's the open loop, I would imagine that's the technique that continually drags everyone back in. And by the way, open loop, there's nothing wrong with an open loop used well, but if you're a writer or a speaker or a communicator or a teacher, there's one fundamental rule with open loops. It's that you close them. You can mess with people's brain. I told this story. I told you this story, Michael, once, but we were hanging out having lunch one day. But I tell the story at the beginning of my training about my first night carrier landing. You've heard the story. And I used to tell that, and I used to stop the story, and then I would finish it at the end of my talk. I don't do that anymore because I forgot to finish it at the end of my talk once. And I finished, and went to the back and started signing books. And I must have had 15 people come up to me and ask, no joke, ask this question. So did you die? But that's what they asked. That's how powerful an open loop is. But I guess, so what's the deal? The media news story is just one psychologically deranged open loop. Is that what we're reading and watching right now?
Well, that's such a negative way to look at it. But to me, I think so. I think it's just we've gotten hooked on, I don't know where the addiction comes or what it is. It seems to sell papers and get ratings, or they probably would do it differently. Let's just leave that alone and say, okay, that's going to be there. I think more important is instead of me saying, well, here's this problem, there's all these newspapers and all these newscasts, and they're making us into cowards and idiots, and that's the end of that story. I'm saying that's the issue. The hero of the story I want to tell is any of you who are listening to this or watching this. You can become the hero by overcoming that toxicity by telling your own stories. And I don't know if I even really approached answering your question, but the key is you start by thinking of what's something you or someone you've worked with or known has accomplished that required work and courage. Now, courage doesn't mean life-threatening. It means that they had the emotional courage to step out of the truth, step out of their identities, is what I say, their protective armor, and take a risk. Okay, think of anything you have accomplished, of which there have been an abundance, and think of one where you had to go through that arc from fear to courage, and you had to take steps to do it. You become the hero of that story if you're the one who did it. If it's one of your clients, if it's a member of your family, it's someone you hear about or know about, and they accomplish the goal, they're the hero. I just mean the protagonist, the main character. And now what you do is say, I started here. This was my everyday life before this crisis occurred. And then you say, this happened. Oh my God, what am I going to do? I decided what I really needed to do was fill in the blank. I had to make $10,000 to pay my rent. I had to lose weight because my doctor said for this reason. I had to accomplish this goal at work. I had to make this, fulfill this order at work, whatever it might be, whatever you accomplished. So you say, I decided that's what I wanted to do. Here are the steps I took. You don't tell them all, but you tell a couple to give us a sense and let us picture what you did. And then you bring in the obstacles that made that hard to do and how you overcame them until you get to the resolution, the climax of the story, when you win. Now, you can even tell a story that's a failure story. I did this and I had to do this thing and I did this, this, and this, and I failed. But then I realized later that the reason I failed is because I was I was too ego involved, or I was going after the wrong thing. And so now I have grown from that experience, and now I know the way to actually achieve this kind of goal is to do this. Even that is a hopeful story because it's giving us a life lesson of how we could transform. And it really, I'm making it sound maybe very simple, but it is. It's a character who is living an everyday life, is confronted with a problem, has a goal that will mean overcoming it, goes through steps and overcomes obstacles until they win.
This is really powerful, by the way. And I wrote something down that as you're watching this, I want you to write these 2 words down. And by the way, Michael, you said something about, in a minute, we're going to catch up on chat. Some of you have made some incredible comments, and I'd like to say hello to some of you. So if you haven't had a chance to yet, please say hello in chat, whichever media platform you're looking on. Michael, you said, I don't know if I answered the question. Well, you definitely answered the question and then some, and I appreciate that. And just so you know, I don't care if you don't answer the question. I'm just enjoying our conversation. And so I want you to write these 2 words down because Michael said these, and I think these are 2 of the most powerful words in communication. The words are but then. But then. Let me put it in front of you in a since we're talking about movies, in a movie way. Luke Skywalker was trying to attack the Death Star. Darth Vader's aircraft came in right behind him, and just as Darth Vader's targeting computer locked on, in the moment that Darth Vader's targeting computer locked on to Luke Skywalker, and you thought all hope was lost. But then Han Solo came flying in the Millennium Falcon, shot everybody to bits, and the Death Star blew up, right? So the great story transitions on that one spot right there. And what Michael said was sometimes you tell a story that ends in failure, but then you learned. Sometimes you tell a story like Denise, I was talking about her story, that's so tragic, but then out of the ashes, this phoenix arises that's stronger, faster, better. So a week ago, I looked into this exact same camera and I said these words about our current crisis, which is, this too shall pass. And when it does, you're going to want to be stronger, faster, better. That's the whole purpose of what we're doing right now on this Bunker Bash. And fundamentally, it's your responsibility to communicate. But then, look, it could be 2 weeks that we're out of our houses. It could be 2 months that we're out of our houses. It could be 2 years. Probably not going to be 2 years, but like it could be. But one way or another, people are looking to you right now for your story. So I want to just say hello to just a couple folks. So Gina said, hope, follow your dreams, no regrets. That's the exact same message that I'm trying to get out there. Denise says it's all about emergence and coming out of our cocoon like a butterfly. Robin, and I think we could get to this, Michael, in a little bit, says, how do you think the current events will impact movies, storytelling, and the entertainment industry? There's actually a question coming up that I think would be great to hit first, actually. Russ, my buddy from Colorado Springs, says we don't want to minimize the crisis. It's real. But as a nation, we've been through significant crisis, and each crisis feels like the end. And yet here we are. There's always hope. And by the way, as you're thinking through this, I could do a longer spit on this. But if you look at the history of our nation, every 80 years, there's a massive crisis. 1776 to 1780, massive crisis. 1860, Civil War, massive crisis. 1940s, World War II, massive crisis. 2020, literally 80, 80, 80. We could do an entire show on that, by the way. Jim House says, did you die? And Jim Budd says, yes, he died, but then he got better, which is the Monty Python line. By the way, Mark Homer, my man, I started a business with Mark, by the way, in Ohio. What's up, man? Good to see you, buddy. Denise says this information is gold. And Kevin says, hello from the Goldfield Mountains. But then, great transition tool. And Luciana, hey, what's up? Good to see you. The question I saw here, let me see if I can find it. It had to do with attention spans, Michael. So I can't find it right now, but I'll just paraphrase the question, and then if I can find it in the chat while you're answering it. The question had to do with dealing with 6-second or short attention spans. And by the way, I would challenge the 6-second attention span. People say, we have these short attention spans. It's true, but if you're interesting, people will give you longer than 6 seconds. So the question was, in an age where we're in a place where people have 6-second attention spans, how do you create your story so that you can use that first 6 seconds to bring people in? Any thoughts on that while we're rocking it?
6 seconds. 6 seconds. That might be a problem this protagonist can't overcome. I mean, that would mean some instant image or headline and so on that would pull people in. I might challenge it. I know we hear that all the time, and I know this is a internet age and so on. Maybe if you're surfing and looking for a product to buy, but I'm guessing you would know better, Ed. I don't think anybody came into this webinar today or this broadcast, gave it 6 seconds because you had some anticipation of coming in, but also people would give you more opportunity than that. I mean, if you have little kids or ever have little kids that were running around crazy and you plunked them in front of a Disney cartoon and you kept them there for 90 minutes, then that idea of 6 seconds goes out the window. Okay, I just thought of a better answer. Okay, forget all that malarkey. Do it.
By the way, this is the official question I found. Leora reposted.
I'm going to answer the 6th question. I'm going to have a better answer.
She said,
grab them in 6 seconds.
Go ahead.
4 words. Once upon a time. Say once upon a time, people will keep listening.
It's good. That's good. Yeah, I mean, so I'll just tell you transparently, for those of you watching, and you've watched this I think this is our 5th episode now. 5th episode. It's getting better. And I will tell you that I'm working right now really hard on putting together strategies that work for live streams. And I'm going to has to do with the question. Because what I realized is every live stream turns into a internet video, right? And people watch them differently. So for example, for somebody like Leora or Denise or Jim or David, there's some people who've been with us for most of the episodes. I could probably get on for the first 10 seconds of this show and cluck like a chicken for 10 seconds, and all 4 of them would still be there at the end of the chicken clucking. But not so for somebody watching a video, because on a video, somebody who doesn't know who I am or doesn't know who you are, they'd show up, I'm clucking like a chicken for 10 seconds, they're gone. And so I realized part of the setting this whole thing up, I'm pushing play. This has to do with the 6 seconds, by the way. I'm pushing go live, and then it takes about 4 seconds, and the system says, now you're live. And by the way, I'm planning on doing a training for all this. I already told you that. But I'm just trying to make sure I figure it out before I teach it to you. So then it says live, and then what you say right there is the beginning of your eventual video. And so what I realized is it's hard not to go, hey, we're live and welcome everybody, and like riff for like a little bit, but you have to remember it turns into video. So today, if you remember, I looked and I said, I wrote this on the board, your world needs to hear your story. And I started just on that. Now, on a live stream, people are all joining in that moment, but on a video, everyone's watching. And so the idea is, Leora, and the question, don't cluck like a chicken. Thank you, Catherine, for saying, I'm not, I promise, really got along, gone after 3 clucks. So she said, I'd stay out of curiosity, probably last a minute of, man, one of these days, y'all, one of these days. My point is, in the first 6 to 10 seconds, your headline, that's your headline. And the next, or your subject line on your email, that's what brings people in. And yeah, I think how you start, so for example, there's a story that Michael and I have worked on, and it starts like this. What do you do when you have 10 seconds to live? That's the way I start the carrier story that some of you have heard. Anyway, so yeah, how you start, huge. And well, let me ask you this question. I'm going to transition to something you and I were talking about yesterday. I had mentioned a book last week, Alter Ego Effect, and you said to me on the phone, you said there's a romantic comedy device. I thought this was pretty cool. You said there's a device used in romantic comedies, which you've helped people write, that is particularly helpful right now for people who are trying to grow their business. What was that? What was that technique?
Well, the book you were mentioning, was it called Alter Ego?
Yeah, it's over here on my stack. By the way, in the stack of books, Mark Homer, who is just here, was a book that Mark Homer and I wrote way back in the day. I still have it sitting right here, buddy. The book is Alter Ego Effect. This is the one I mentioned last week by Todd Herman. It was essentially about how to create, geez, there goes the books, Mark. There goes the, so, hey, live video, man, can't edit it out. All the books now are, thank God it didn't kill my sound gear. It may have for all that, for the number of sound issues that I've had. All right, so the book, the book was Alter Ego Effect. So I'll clean up the mess and you talk about the book.
Okay, it was involving because it involved conflict. You know, emotion. So we were all leaning in to let you embarrass yourself.
But then Ed took himself off the live stream and let Michael talk, and he cleaned up his books. So
there you go. Okay, so let me see if I can do this succinctly. I'm going to go into screenwriting teaching mode for just a minute. Okay, I want you to think about romantic comedies where the character pretends to be someone they're not. Tootsie would be a great example. Man pretends to be a woman. Mrs. Doubtfire has the same kind of disguise sort of thing. Working Girl, I know these are older movies, but they're some of my favorites. In Working Girl, a secretary, in order to get respected as a broker, pretends to be a broker to put together a deal. And this imposture always creates mammoth obstacles to overcome. And finally, the truth comes out and everything goes to crap at the end of Act 2 until finally they come back and they, win true love and they get the deal or the job or whatever it is that they were searching for. And even if it's not somebody exactly putting on a disguise like that, if you take Another movie, it's one of my favorites, Hitch, that some of you have heard me talk about. There, it's always about deception. I'm hiding the fact that I'm a date doctor. I'm pretending that I'm not really a reporter for a gossip paper or whatever it might be. So it's always going to be disguise, deception. Those are common elements of Hollywood romantic comedies. Deception is big. Okay, so what happens in a movie like Tootsie is, you've got this guy, and he's kind of a jerk. He's very self-involved. He doesn't consider anybody else's feelings. He's willing to go to bed with a friend, and then he goes to bed with somebody else. We don't, we empathize with him for other reasons, but sort of on the outside, being himself, he's kind of a jerk, and on the inside, he's all caught up in his ego. Okay. But then he has a chance to get a job. So he decides, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pretend to be a woman. So what I say is, in the beginning, he's true on the outside. Yeah, he really is an actor, and that's really him. That's really Michael Dorsey, the Dustin Hoffman character. But on the inside, he's false. He's living from his ego. He's not really revealing his truth or his essence, okay? Now he's going to put on a disguise to pretend to be Dorothy Michaels. Now he's false on the outside. He's not really Dorothy. He's pretending to be. He's still false on the inside. He's still driven by ego. But then what happens? As Dorothy Michaels, as he's working on this soap, he starts treating the woman he's falling for as getting to be his friend as a friend, not as just an object or someone he doesn't have any real connection to. He starts to be more considerate. He starts helping other people as Dorothy Michaels. So now what he's doing is he's transforming on the inside, and he's becoming more of his essence, more of who he has the potential to become. He's more honest, he's more loving, he's more giving. Finally, the truth comes out and the disguise is taken away. But now he has learned how to be emotionally courageous enough to let go of that protective armor of ego and actually be there for other people. So now in the end, he's true on the outside and true on the inside. Now, I hope that wasn't too complicated, but the point I got from what you were saying about the alter ego is, you said if we pretend to be who we want to be, then that will enable us to do it. And I'm saying in movies, that's always what the character does. The character is almost always hiding behind an emotional armor, and that's they're living under that. But if they say I want to act as the person I want to become, that process is also going to bring out enough courage so that is actually who you become, not just physically, not just those actions, but emotionally and psychologically, you are going to be living much more of your truth eventually, because that's always who you were, that was covered up by this emotional armor that kept you safe, feeling safe.
That's so cool.
Did that make sense?
That is so cool. Yeah. So it really interestingly brings together, and what I said, I don't remember which episode this was, and I think it was right around the second episode when I was talking about this book. Essentially what I said was what you just said, which is you want to be more bold. Let's say you want to be a bolder person, but you're always holding yourself back. So what you do is you create this alter ego, this superhero version of yourself that's always bold in all the situations. And then you end up being bold in all these situations. And what you find out is that was actually the true version of you in the first place. And that something else was the thing that was holding you back. By the way, I thought of a story in between then and now, and I'm going to make a couple references. But before I do that, right below you, there's a website, and I'll let Michael mention what's on there in a second. But it's storymastery.com/6steps. Michael prepared a really cool little freebie for you that you can get and download if you want to. And it's about, well, you talk about it real quick, and then I'll go into the little story that I was going to tell. But I got a couple other movies for you to study. Not you, Michael, you've already studied the movies, but for you watching to study around this. But really quickly, because I want to make sure we don't go too far without you mentioning this. At storymastery.com/6steps, you've got your story formula for people who are thought leaders so that they can better tell their story. You want to mention it real quick?
Yeah, the process that I've developed or came up with that grew out of a structural process I had created for movies, but now I'm zeroing it in more on for business leaders and speakers and thought leaders and so on that aren't professional storytellers like screenwriters and novelists. And I call it a 6-step success story process. So what I did to explain it, or to lay it out, is I created this ebook. And so it lays out what the 6 steps are, explains them with some discussion. But then I interviewed one of my clients who told me a story about a marathon he ran and what that meant to him and how he was transformed by that. And so I listened to his story, I wrote it out, and that full story is in this ebook. So you'll get to see a story that he actually turned into a magazine article and a keynote speech, and you can see how those principles apply. So it'll give you more in depth about the process and an example of it than I can do, in a short time.
It's interesting. I was just thinking through while you were telling that Tootsie story. I was thinking through some other movies that I really admire and how this works itself out in different ways. So, for example, my kids and I and my wife, we all watched this movie, Mrs. Doubtfire, which Robin Williams, sort of 80s, I think it was created. And it was a movie where essentially Robin Williams was like a really good dad. And he had to disguise himself as this woman because of his divorcing wife. But in the process, his wife actually realized how great of a dad he was, even though he was always this great of a dad. The other movie, I was just thinking about it. I was actually like starting to get emotionally moved even thinking about it, was the movie Regarding Henry, where Harrison Ford has an accident and essentially really turns into this really great guy because of this brain accident that he has. So anyway, I was thinking about, I was in high school. I was at a junior high, I think, actually. I was at a summer camp. And because of I have a basketball heritage in my family. My dad was a basketball referee, and my mom is in the Basketball Hall of Fame as a basketball player. And despite all that, I was a very poor basketball player. But I went to this summer camp, and the coach there of the summer camp basketball team pulled me aside on the first day of the camp, and he said, "Hey, you're my star player this year on my team." And he must have assumed I was good because my family I have a basketball background, but I was a pretty horrible basketball player. And he's like, "You're my star this year, so don't miss any practices or games." I said, "All right." And I'm not exaggerating when I tell you, I was amazing that summer as a basketball player. I was making some of the shots like I've never made before. And the reason I did was because this coach was under the ignorant, blind assumption that I was good, but because he believed I was good, somehow I actually became good. And I still think about that in terms of just the thought experiment. And so anyway, back to the point. As you're watching this today, I want you to think about what does your character look like in the movie that you write about yourself? And write the story so that you have your enemy, which you have, and your obstacle, which you have, and then the breakthrough that you have. And then when you get done with it, turn it into a story that you tell, because that story will change the world. Anyway, a little bit of a side riff, but that's your job. And Michael Hauge is the one to help you do it. So go to storymastery.com/6 steps. I don't think that was even a question. Over to you. What are your thoughts?
First of all, just a slight correction, because I'm going to be a jerk as a guest, but
regarding
Mrs. Doubtfire, he wasn't a good dad.
Oh, before.
Yeah, he was very irresponsible. It starts with him putting on a party for his kids, and it's chaos.
Oh, they have like a dog, a horse walking around.
Yeah. And he's not dependable. He doesn't show up on time. He's very irresponsible. He's one of those dads that wants to just let his kids play instead of disciplining them.
Wait, I thought that was the definition of a good dad. Oh,
well, we all have identities.
Wait, you're not supposed to have a pony walking through the house?
Yeah, exactly. I
Oh,
mean, we all have
now
our
I know why my wife
identity.
gets frustrated.
Yeah, maybe that's your identity. Maybe you find the courage to be, a responsible dad. And so that arc is that transformation. And what you're saying, I think it's the essence of story. Story, all those steps I talked about are all the, hero and goal and so on. That's the plot. That's what we see on the screen or read on the page. But underneath, the real essence of the story is about transformation. And at the start of the story, and when you're telling your own story, if you can allow yourself to go to that place and figure out before you went on this journey to accomplish that goal, how were you afraid? What were you afraid of? And how were you protecting yourself from that fear by living in some identity that kept you safe? Maybe your fear was, I can't upset anybody. That's a big one for mine. Maybe your fear is, I can't ask for help. Maybe my fear is, I've got to be perfect. Maybe my fear is whatever was built into you, whatever belief you had from the wounds of your childhood or adolescence or some crisis or trauma. But if you go to that level and say, I was afraid because I'd had this pain in the past and I was trying to protect myself. And then in order to achieve the goal, I had to be willing to let go of that emotional armor and step out of that identity and live in my truth, what I call my essence. And if you can talk about how you found the courage to accomplish the goal, those are the most powerful stories, because it doesn't really matter. A good story, we don't care if we are necessarily in or have ever been in the situation of the hero of the story, but we do need to connect with the underlying courage that that character had to find. Sometimes it's just physical courage, like in a Marvel movie or something like that. But in romantic comedies, always, the arc is always emotional fear that has to be overcome in order to achieve the goal. And if we want to loop back to what's going on in the world now, and saying they need to hear your story, we need examples of courage, because when everyone is very frightened, we need to feel protected. And the protection can take forms that we don't want to, with people lining up to buy guns for an extreme thing. But we need to be willing to risk feeling closer to people, not getting closer, but connecting more and inspiring more and helping more in whatever way we can. Sorry, I was back on my box office there.
Well, I like that, and so I'll just give you. And by the way, in about 45 seconds, we're going to open it up for your questions. And so write in chat on YouTube, Facebook, or Twitter, whichever one you're watching on. Type your question in, please. We've got about 6 minutes, maybe 8 minutes, to take your questions one-on-one. And look, this is a guy who gets paid a lot of money to help people with stories. So if you have specific questions that you want to get help on, we just want to honor you for being here with us live. And so ask your questions now in chat. Now's the time to do it. I'll just say, last night, Michael, it was interesting. I was here in my office and I was thinking about how to introduce you. Now, it's not the first time I've introduced you. I think it's probably now the 4th or 5th time that I've introduced you. But I was thinking about how is it that I would introduce you, and I ended up on this thing, the thing that I really thought was fun, which is you're abnormal, amazing person, but you think you're normal. But I was also thinking, and I'll tell you the other introduction that I thought of that I didn't do, but I'll do it now because it's really interesting, and it was almost like a light bulb went off last night when I thought about it, which is Mike. I've known you now long enough to know that Michael Hauge really doesn't like talking about anything at all unless it's in one of two topics. And one of the topics is story. And the other topic, which this is a little insider thing, he loves talking about, I think the best way to describe it is human psychology, the way we think. And it was interesting last night when I was writing some stuff in preparation for our show today, I realized those are the same thing, right? I mean, fundamentally, our stories are the way we think about ourselves, and the way we think about ourselves fundamentally become our stories. And I realized all of a sudden that your two topics actually were just one topic.
I more than once described myself to you as a one-trick pony. And at first you used to say, oh, no. Finally, Ed says to me at one point, you're right. You really are just a one-trick pony. There's no story. But then it's nice psychology is lumped in there too.
So, all right. So I'm gonna go to we have a couple questions, and I'm going to go to those really quickly. Before I do that, I have to ask you. I'm going to be doing this show every day for the foreseeable future at 10 a.m. So if you're interested in hearing from Michael Hauge again, and I'm assuming you are, please tell me in chat, because Michael, I'd love to have you back for a couple of segments in the future. We can talk about story and what's happened in the world, but that's up to you. So you let me know.
Well, I'd love to do it. I feel like I need to come back to answer more questions because we kept promising it, and then I get off on my thing, and so I want to be able to answer. I'm willing to stay a little longer if people want to hang to answer more questions.
Okay. So we'll stick around for a little bit longer. Let me go. We've got a couple. So John Teague says, when you're telling your story early in a presentation, how much time do you think that you should spend on it?
Well, let's see. I should think a little more before I start throwing out answers. It's first of all tough because it depends on the story and how it's structured and how emotionally involving it is. There was a quote by Roger Ebert I love that he said once. He was the most successful movie critic in history. And he said, no great movie is ever too long and no bad movie is ever too short. And that way with stories, it depends on the length of the overall presentation. If let's say it's keynote length, I would put a story at the beginning. Generally speaking, 5 minutes, probably 10 would be the outside limit. But if you've got a riveting story, I could be talked out of that. And then if it's keynote length, you want one at the beginning and one probably that goes deeper into that inner journey stuff at the end that is, probably more personal to you and you're willing to be more vulnerable to tell. As it gets longer, you might want to sprinkle stories through. And one other thing, John, you didn't ask it, but be aware too, sometimes the best thing to do is create what Ed was calling an open loop. Start a story at the beginning or get it to a certain point and then flash back to it later with the message that you took from that earlier story, or finish it later on. Like Ed forgot to do in his speech about the carrier landing.
Killing myself.
But if you need a hard number, I would say 5 to 10 minutes, somewhere in that range.
So I'll give my thought on that just from a speaker standpoint. And Michael, I threw the second question, which I think is going to be our last question for today, up. Robin said, how do you decide on themes when telling your story? So let me just give you my thought really quickly, John, on storytelling and speaking. So first of all, what Michael said is right. 0 seconds for a story that's not interesting, and frankly, as long as you want for a good one. There was a guy I brought into an event once whose name is Cal Fussman. Cal was a writer in Esquire magazine, got to interview Mikhail Gorbachev, Muhammad Ali, and he told a story about his interview with Muhammad Ali, which lasted over a period of 6 days. And the story took about 20 to 25 minutes as a part of his speech. And the entire time you're waiting on every word. And it was a very well-told story that was very interesting. And so for those of you who've watched, all 3 hours of Braveheart, you know that if the story is interesting, you're going to stick with it. When I do my keynote speeches, I open with the story I was telling you about, the carrier landing story. I usually open with that. That is about an 8 to 10 minute story, depending on how long I do it. And that's normally embedded into a 45-minute to about an hour and 15-minute keynote speech. And during the rest of that speech, I will typically tell 2 to 3 more stories that are each about 6 to 8 minutes long. So most of my points are backed up by stories. Michael, this last question here. How do you decide on themes when telling your story? What is your thought on that? And then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, well, if you're telling a story, when you're choosing your stories, either about yourself or about, say, a successful client or follower or audience member or whatever, success story for somebody else, what I would do is don't start with theme. First of all, what I mean by theme, I'm not sure you define it the same way. By theme, what I mean is the prescription for living the story is giving. How the story is telling us we could all be more evolved, more individuated, more self-defined, better people. Okay, so I would focus on more of the external. What was the goal? How big were the obstacles? Did you achieve it? Start with that, because the more conflict in the story there is, the more emotional it will be. But then, as you're choosing, take all the stories that fill that criteria and look and ask yourself, what did I learn from this experience? How did I change? And then whatever change you went through, what you're saying, we can all live our lives better if we had that kind of courage, or if we took those kind of steps that you did to get there. And if you can find that, and that's something you feel is important to give to your audience or to your reader, if you're doing it on a blog or something like that, that's the one you should pick. So I think the external, the outer journey of the hero is where you start, and then you look for the theme to come out of that. I think if you say, I want to tell a story about honesty, you possibly could, but you'd have to go through your card catalog of stories and say, well, which one did I really have to learn to be more honest? But I think if you go for the emotional story on the surface and then dig into it, sometimes digging to a place you may not want to get to, because you might want to really look at how what the fear was and what the courage you had to find. That's how I do it.
Let me tell you a mostly fabricated story about honesty. That's how I think you should actually start I'm just kidding. What's the, by the way, Michael told me something, and you're gonna have to do this because I can't remember the way you said it. There's a way that you said about making stories factually.
Oh, yeah, it's when you're telling a business story, when you're trying to market yourself, let's say, or you're espousing a process or whatever, the story needs to be true, but it doesn't have to be factual. I'll just leave it at that. Let people take their own interpretation from that.
We were sitting in a conference room here in San Diego. We're going through, by the way, a story together that I had been working on, and Michael said that, and I thought it was as funny then as I think it is now. I think it's awesome. When you're telling a story, it should be true, but it doesn't necessarily, yeah. So you make of it what you want to make of it. I made of it time compression, just so you know. Anyway, I want to catch up on a few comments. We're going to wrap up in just a few minutes. And I just want to say, Michael, first of all, thank you. Second, awesome job. Today we had about 20 more people at the end of the show than we had at the beginning. And that doesn't always happen. So I just want to thank you for just the incredible fun and content. And let's do
it's so much 20 fewer people.
No, it's more. It's great. I appreciate that.
I feel kind of guilty about that.
No,
this is fun. As you see, I can go on, and I love the opportunity to link story to what's going on now, and it's just always fun to talk to you.
So let's do maybe next week, midweek, we'll get back together again and do another segment and kind of catch up with what's going on. I will tell you, first of all, as we're getting ready to wrap up, I got a couple of quick thoughts for you. And then, Michael, I'm going to kind of pitch it to you for some last minute thoughts on what can someone do right now? I mean, like, we've got some time right now. You know, I've got my speakers that we're going to be doing a training this afternoon, and I'm going to teach them, like, here's what you can do right now. So what I'd love in just a minute, maybe about a minute and a half, close us with what are the next steps that we can take to become great storytellers. And I just want to go through some chat real quick and just say thank you. And as I'm just acknowledging some folks, would you mind clicking the thumbs up button, the like button, saying a little something in chat if you haven't said anything already, and that share button, that would be awesome too. Okay, and so I just want to say some things that some nice people said. Dr. Katarina Burris said, great to listen to you, Michael. What's up, man? That was very nice. Jim House, Resetology, said he loves it. Yeah, not physical distancing and social connecting. We need people and things like this, he said, which is awesome. Blue Collar says, I use Michael's lessons in this book. This is Bart. Storytelling Made Easy, Persuade and Transform Your Audiences, Buyers, and Clients. I went through some of the questions. Let's see. Thank you, Denise, for that comment. It's very, very good. Jim House said, hell yes. Oops. Heck yes. So there. Jim Butts, love to hear more. Aaron said we'd definitely be interested in hearing more from Michael Hauge. India, what's up? From Houston, Texas. Always more Michael. Michael did great. More is better. Cannot get enough, Denise says, of Michael. Yes, please. Yes, please. Michael is great. Look at this. Salih, how are you? Yes, please. Look at this. Yep, 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 says Dennis. David Zetz, great stuff. And it goes on and on and on.
I enjoyed this part of the show.
Thank you, Ed and Michael. Sabrina Salt, what's up? Oh, thank you. Sabrina knows that I've been working on my...
I lost you.
Are you still there?
I lost you there. I don't know if everybody did.
Oh, we just like refreshed here. Okay, so we're back. No, comments should still be on. All right. So anyway, I want to wrap up really quickly. Michael, I said that you would have the last word. So take us home, man.
Yeah. Okay. First, I want to respond to Denise, who said very nice things, because when I was typing in a few days ago to one, you asked a question that we didn't exactly go to. You were concerned about starting in this time with what's going on with your story, because it starts in a sort of a dark, full of conflict place. Do people want to hear those stories now that it's so dark in the real world out there? And my answer would be absolutely, those are the stories they want to hear, because they will be drawn in emotionally, because it's your conflict that you are bringing in. They will empathize with you, but those are the stories about how you found the courage and how you overcame the obstacles I know you overcame. They're going to inspire others. So keep doing that. Don't back off from the conflict at the beginning because of what's going on in the outside world, just the opposite. And other than that, let's see, what I'd say is, in terms of what to do next, the first thing, and this isn't directly related to story, but if you're doing this for business, if you're going to be working on your business, one of the questions I ask clients all the time, and I've heard Ed ask the same thing or talk about it, is, what is the problem you're solving for people? What is it you're offering people? Because it needs to be about problems they recognize that they have, that they want to overcome, or the obstacles they know or believe they're going to face to achieve the goals they want to achieve. Think about that, because then what you want to think about is, okay, I know I can help somebody overcome these obstacles. I know that I can help them solve their problem. Now think about all the examples you can think of. Just start listing all the clients you have had, or all the times in your life that you learned something that would help, that you grew in some way, you established your principles that stand behind what you do. So think about the problems first that you want to help people with, and then just say, when has this happened? What have I done for people? What are the stories? And just keep writing down stories in terms of who was the character, what was their goal, and what did they have to do to achieve it with my help? Because if you're telling stories about clients, you become Mr. Miyagi. You're the guide, and they're the hero of the story. If it's your own story, same thing. So then once you've done that, then you listen to this recording or go to that ebook, or if you want to get my book that's available, on my website, or that somebody mentioned, Storytelling Made Easy, that goes into much greater depth. But even the free ebook will give you a lot of tips about how you start, what those 6 steps are. And otherwise, last thing, and then I'll wind up, don't believe, because what have I been pontificating about, or we've been talking about, that this is something really big and complicated. You've been telling stories your whole life. All I'm saying is, do more of it and tell the stories that come from you and people you've helped that had a successful outcome. That's what people need to hear now. That's what's going to make them more courageous and more inspired to overcome these real life obstacles. There.
Awesome. I got this right here. I love it. You've been telling stories your whole life. Now do more of it. Michael, hang with me for a second as I wrap up the show. By the way, I just want to say thank you for your time. We're going to do this again, probably next week. We'll get on and talk a little bit more about story. The website is below you, storymastery.com/6 steps. And by the way, I have been sending email invites to this off and on, okay? And so I'm not going to send an email out every single day. You can find this every day on YouTube, Facebook, or Twitter. whichever social media platform you like to use the best. Most of the people have been on YouTube and a handful over on Facebook, just to tell you where most of it's at. So if you want to be where the action's at, probably YouTube is the place to go. Tomorrow, I'm going to talk about our economy, and then we're going to get back into our discussion of how to make money with your ideas. And I'm going to be talking about pricing models and how to get paid what you're worth. Okay. Some awesome comments. I'll say hello to a few folks who just came on or just made some comments. So John Butler Buzz, good conversation and helpful. Thank Mike Kerno, my man from Denver. More of Michael, please. He said, coming from the better looking Michael. All right. That's how you can contact us. And if you haven't gone to edrush.com, just put your name and email in there. That'll make sure that whatever platform we end up having this on, you'll get a notification. Leora says, thank you so much. Scott says, I love all the mental tic tacs you guys are providing. Thanks. Leora, thank you for this. Denise, thanks, Ed and Michael. And oh yeah, thanks, Jim House. There's a button if you're on YouTube right over here someplace that says subscribe. Click that at the very least. That'll get YouTube to tell you every once in a while when we're going live. Michael Hague, you are the man, sir.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun for me, and I appreciate getting to share what I love. So thanks.
You are the man.
Always good to talk to you.
We'll do it again, and we'll do it again real soon. Hey, we're going to sign off. Thank you for your time. You are amazing. Stay positive. Stay positive. Very soon, all of this is going to come to an end, and you're going to be better, faster, and stronger for it. I will talk to you tomorrow on episode 6 of the Bunker Bash. You're not going to want to miss it. Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.